Hi everyone, and welcome to a special episode of Not the Worsted Knitting Podcast. My name is Michelle, and I am the knitter and knitwear designer behind meeshyfrazz Knits. In today's episode, we are going to be going over my most and least worn fall knits. Today felt like the perfect day to film this episode. It's 60 degrees outside, it's raining, it's overcast. I can see the leaves falling from the trees right now, and I just feel like everything is very on theme to officially be thinking about fall knitting. And so I just wanted to share some of the fall knits that I wear the most and a couple that I don't wear quite as often. Now, nothing on this list is anything that I dislike or that I regret knitting. I actually love everything here, but I'll explain why some of them get a little bit more wear than others. And so I'll go over each pattern. I'll talk a little bit about the yarn I used and any modifications that I may have made to better fit me or my lifestyle. And also on that note, to talk about order, I'm going to be going through these in the order of most recently knit to least recently knit. So my newest knit will be first, and later knits obviously will go down the list. I don't know about you, but typically the things I knit more recently I tend to be more excited to wear them right off the bat just because it's new and fun and shiny. So I think for this season, those are probably gonna be a little bit more worn, but there are some tried and true ones in this list that I still pull from just all the time. So without further ado, why don't we get started with my most recent fall knit. Now this one's kind of funny. It's a bit of a special one because I've only really worn this like once because I just finished it. And if you have watched my podcast previously, then you will know all about this sweater. But if you haven't, then I will give all the details. I actually just finished this last week. And this is my Field Day Cardigan by Ozetta. Now I'm gonna go ahead and put this on. I wanna wear each of my knits throughout this video so you can see how they fit me. So let me slide this guy on. Oh God, I love this so much. So like I said, just finished it. It's still very fresh for me, but it's so good. So here's how it looks unbuttoned. And I will make sure to do B-roll for each of these. So as I'm talking about it, I'll probably pop in some B-roll of me walking around in it so you can just see how it drapes. This, like I said, Field Day Cardigan by Ozetta. I just checked and this pattern is only $6.50 on Ravelry, which I don't know, I was a little bit surprised by that. I mean, I know I purchased this pattern, but I purchased it a while ago, so I had forgotten just how much it cost. But I think for a cardigan of this construction, I think that's a really great deal. So I had knit this about halfway through. I was knitting it on a size 2, and I did a gauge swatch, but if you have worked with superwash yarn or really a lot of regular yarns, a gauge swatch that's 4x4 or even 10x10 inches is not always reflective of what an actual garment is going to drape like once you've got that weight and kind of once you get into a groove of knitting it, just because you're never really knitting a swatch in the same way you're knitting a garment. And so once I had done a decent amount of the back portion of this, I already realized that I was a little off gauge, but I was thinking that maybe it would be okay because this is meant to be a boxy, oversized cardigan. But I got about halfway through and realized that it was going to be very big on me. And on top of that, I probably wasn't going to have enough yarn to finish it either. So I ended up frogging it when I was about somewhere around here. I frogged it, and instead of putting it in the naughty corner, I gave it like a week, and then I just immediately came back to it because I really wanted to have this for this fall season, and I'm really glad I did. So I ended up knitting a size 1 to achieve a size 2 fit. So I'll go ahead and go over some of the details of the patterns to give you an idea. I did not, even when I was doing the gauge swatch, I did not meet gauge, so I had to go down a needle size to a US 6 or 4 millimeter. And even with that, my sizing, my gauge was still off in terms of the fit for this. And so knitting to the size 1 gave me exactly the fit for a size 2, which was the size I was trying to achieve anyway. The yarn I used was Hazel Knits Lively DK in the colorway Shannypants. Again, if you have watched me, then you know how much I am obsessed with this colorway because it's stunning. And a few people asked me, and I did want to say, I did not alternate skeins. And I mean, I have to say, like, look at how consistent that color is. Like, obviously it's a tonal yarn, but I really don't feel like there was a lot of pooling or problematic areas. I think it knit up quite beautifully. And so the other fun thing too is that I purchased 4 skeins, and when all was said and done with this, that is all the yarn I have left. These 3 little nuggets, that's it. So for this size, let's see, I used almost 4 full skeins, which ended up being 1,064 yards or 503 grams. And so I've just got enough left over to hold for, honestly, just like repairs maybe. I'll hold on to the yarn because you never know if you need to do any sort of seaming or anything. Let's see. Outside of that, I did knit this completely according to pattern. I did the sleeve length exactly at the measurement she said. Now, I held off on I held off on binding off my sleeves until I blocked it because I wanted to make sure the length would be good, just because this is a top-down drop shoulder cardigan. And if you're familiar with knitting drop shoulders, then once you seam this, oftentimes what happens is you get this kind of roll where it pulls up the sleeve. And so I wanted to make sure I blocked it to see what the accurate length was going to be on this. And it worked out to be perfect, exactly to pattern. I didn't need to modify the sleeve length at all. So once it was blocked, I was able to bind off my sleeves, sew in the buttons. And these buttons are from Handspun Hope, and I bought them at Flock Fiber Festival this past summer. Let's see. So, like I said, this is a V-neck drop shoulder cardigan. You start by working the back, and you do German short rows to do the shoulder shaping. And then you add on a part of the button band, and then you kind of build the left side and the right side from there. And then eventually, once you've gotten the left and right sides and back to the same length, then you join it. You're still knitting it flat, but you join it all together and knit it completely. And then the sleeves are added on because you pick up stitches, obviously, and then you knit the sleeves in the round. So it's a little bit complex at first, but it's very worth it. I am in love with this cardigan. I'm in love with the way it fits. I love how it feels. I feel like I'm really happy that I was able to achieve the fit I wanted to by going down a needle size, going down a needle size and pattern size. It doesn't always work out that way. Like sometimes when I have to adjust like knitting to a size to get a different size, sometimes I end up somewhere in between. But this, amazingly enough, it wound up perfectly fitting me the way I wanted to for the recommended fit. And so speaking of fit, this pattern comes in 9 sizes. So it ranges from a 38-inch bust to a 68-inch bust, which is 107 to 173 centimeters. She recommends 8 inches or 20 centimeters of positive ease. And the pattern recommends using Woolfolk straw, which I believe is a 50-50 merino linen blend. Now I am using, like I said, Hazel Knits Lively DK, which is just a 100% superwash merino. And, you know, with that, I figured it would give me about the same level of drape because I'm using a superwash merino to kind of like even out what she was using with the linen. And I mean, obviously, I think some of that affected my gauge a little bit, which is why I couldn't meet her gauge, but you know, a little bit of math and here we are, and I am thrilled with it. So I have only worn this once, like I said. However, I think I'm going to be wearing this pretty much throughout the fall and winter. I'm already grabbing for it when it's chilly. I've been a little afraid to wear it too much just yet because I wanted to make sure I filmed a podcast episode before it got a little bit too worn. But this is a great one. So if you're up for a little bit of a challenge with the construction of the beginning construction of the back, then I would say go for it because, I mean, this is a really great pattern. So I think that is all there is to say about that. Like I said, if you've been watching me, then you're probably so tired of hearing me talk about this cardigan, just because I've been working on this on and off for a couple of months between, you know, starting it, ripping it out, starting again. But I have nothing but great things to say about the pattern and the yarn. This Lively Decay, it feels really great. It's still, even though it's superwash, it still gives you a nice hardy wool feel. Like I wouldn't say that it's too soft. I'm not really worried about it pilling, and that's really nice. And then also I wanted to mention, because I had somebody reach out to me and say that she loved the yarn, but she was just a little bummed because it's a tough price point for her to get the amount of skeins she would need for her size, which I totally get. And I wanted to mention that if you're in the area, I don't know about Hazelnut's online store, but I know that if you're in the Seattle area and can go to her store, Hazelnut's has an entire like sale section on one side where it's either like extra skeins, like they'll have like runoff of the skeins that they were winding that's not quite enough to fill a full skein, or it's like 2 half skeins to make a full skein, but they can't sell it as a full skein. They'll have a lot of runoffs like those. And then they also, these 4 skeins that I bought were in there because she said that it was like the end of the mill's run for the yarn, and so the ply was a little looser than usual. And I took a look at the yarn and I thought it looked fine. And she just mentioned, she was like, it's probably okay, but it's not quite at the standard that we normally do, and I don't want to risk somebody buying this at full price and not being thrilled with it if the plies are loose. So I took that gamble and I bought this yarn on sale. It was decently discounted, and I have no complaints, none at all. I mean, like, I'll get up close so you can see how it looks. Like, it looks great. I love it. So that's an option, you know, to think about if you really like this yarn. And even if it's not necessarily this yarn, if you're not in the area and you can't find it, just always keep an eye on dyers who have, like, typically dyers will have some things that are, they're just like not quite up to spec for the recipe that they have. And oftentimes they'll have like a little clearance area where you can find some really good deals. And sometimes luck works out where you find something that's exactly the color that you're drawn to anyway, like this, and you get it for a discount. So that all in all just makes this cardigan even more satisfying of a knit. And that is my most recent fall knit that I will be wearing all the time. So now I'm gonna change and we're gonna flip to the next sweater. Okay, I am back. And I am now wearing the second item on my list, which is the Weekender Light. So I guess we're continuing on the green theme. It's funny because I didn't realize how much of a green kick I was on until like a month ago, and then I realized how much green I've been knitting. Although actually, I will say this, I knit a couple of years ago. So this is the Weekender Light, and this is a pattern by Andrea Mowry. It is $9 on Ravelry, and so there are some big modifications that I made for this pattern. So I'm gonna lean up for a bit. Also, I might just pop in some B-roll here so you can see what the big highlight of the Weekender and the Weekender Light, if you're not familiar, is this neckline where you've got kind of a ribbed neckline, a boat neck. And then with the Weekender specifically, you get this slip stitch down the front, and it is knit in reverse stockinette. So you actually knit it inside out. And then when you do the sleeves, you actually just knit that in normal stockinette. So this pattern actually is recommended to use Brooklyn Tweed Loft, which I actually have some here coincidentally because I have another pattern coming up that uses this. So this is Brooklyn Tweed Loft, and it's funny because this is considered a fingering weight yarn, but I don't know. I almost feel like it's more of like a sport to DK weight, especially because it's a woolen spun yarn, and so you get a lot of thick and thin. And so it's a pretty lofty, hardy yarn. I mean, the name is perfect. And I had already used this in another project, and while I liked it, I wanted something a little bit lighter than Loft for this sweater, just because, like I said, even though it's technically fingering weight, I didn't feel like it was fingering weight, and I wanted something a little bit more fine. And on top of that, because this pattern is reverse stockinette, which means you kind of see the backside of your knitting, that's not a texture I always love. Like sometimes it's okay, but it's not something I really wanted to highlight. So I wanted some yarn that actually wasn't gonna show a lot of stitch definition. I wanted something that was gonna give a nice halo so that when you look at the sweater, you just see a sweater and you're not seeing the stitches. And so I will pull out what little nugget of this yarn I have left. The yarn that I ended up using is Juniper Moon Farm Harriot. It's Harriot Fine, actually, is the name of the yarn. And the colorway I used is Jadeite. And so this is actually labeled as an extra fine yarn. And this is actually really fun that I've got both of these to compare. I'm gonna try and hold them up. I don't know how well this will show. Probably not very. So that's the difference in the yarn weights. You can see that the Loft is definitely plumper. And it's also a little less consistent just because it's woolen spun, whereas the Harriot Fine is consistent throughout at this weight. So it's definitely more of an extra fine fingering weight yarn, which meant that my gauge was way off, which I expected. So I did a gauge swatch at the recommended needles, which the recommended needle size for the body was US 4, which is a 3.5 millimeter needle. And what ended up happening was I really liked the fabric at that needle. I didn't want to go up a needle size because then I thought it was going to be a little too gappy, and this fabric is perfect. Like it's great as is. And I think just going up a larger needle size would have not been great for it. So I was 3 stitches off from the recommended gauge, which is decently significant. And there were some factors that I had to think about because not only did I need to go up a size or two to achieve the fit I wanted, but I needed to look at 2 different sizes because this is knit bottom up, and you know, you have to think about row gauge, and because you're knitting bottom up and thinking about actual armhole depth based on the amount of rows you're doing, you can't just go off of numbers if your gauge doesn't match, because then you're gonna have either a crazy big or crazy small armhole. And so I had to follow a size 4 to achieve a fit somewhere in between a size 2 or a 3, which is what I was going for. So to give you some insight, I am a 34-inch bust. The size 2 was a 40-inch bust. The size 3 was a 44-inch bust. And this pattern recommends 10 inches of positive ease, which now I don't typically like a ton of positive ease. I like a little bit. And so I was okay with not doing the full 10. And so I found that going somewhere in between sizes 2 and 3 would get me right in that sweet spot, which I did. I think I ended up, I don't think I wrote this part down, but I ended up with a decent amount of positive ease, but I don't think it has 10 inches. So, yeah. So I used size 4 for my reference for the width of the garment. And those were the numbers I used in terms of all of the width of how many stitches to cast on, how many increases, all of that. increases. Did I do increases? Because this is bottom up. And it was, yeah, anyway, you know what I mean. And then in terms of row gauge and length, I went off of the size 3. And that gave me a really nice size armhole, which is really the big thing that I needed to think about was armhole depth. And so it was a bit of math to figure this out and figure out exactly where my numbers were gonna line up. But I ended up with a fit that I love. Like, I think this is great. And if you hear rumbling and little whines in the background, Bagel and Tuna, of course, are wrestling now that it's video time. So yeah, you know the drill if you've been here before. Anyway, back to the sweater. So let's see. Juniper Moon Farm, Harriot Fine, same needle sizes, figured out my gauge, figured out the sizes I wanted to do. For this sweater, to achieve somewhere between the sizes 2 and 3, I ended up using, how much did I use? About like almost a full 3 skeins. Actually, this was all that was left of the 3rd skein, which ended up being 1,332 yards or 289 grams. So, I mean, not too bad, like, especially if you've used Patagonia, not Patagonia, if you have used Juniper Moon Farm Harriot Fine, then you know that you get a lot for your money. There's a lot of yardage in this yarn. So really happy with that. And yeah, so it is knit bottom up. You actually have a split hem. And so you knit a little bit more on the back, a little bit less on the front, which is also very helpful when you're trying to figure out which side is the front and the back. And then you pick up those and then you knit in the round up. Like I said, you knit inside out because you're basically doing ribbing with 1 single slip stitch down the middle, which gives this really nice line, which is kind of, if you're familiar with the Weekender line, then you know that's kind of the whole vibe is that line and then the neckline. The shoulder detail is really nice. You've got this ribbed detail and then you do the 3 needle bind off to join the seams and it gives a really nice line. And then you get this boat neck, which I will say that is one complaint I have about this. Like it's not bad or anything, but I wish that I had actually maybe bound off a little bit less amount of stitches. And that could actually have to do with just all of the different numbers I was looking at. I might have just, I probably should have bound off a few less for a slightly more open boat neck, just because I do sometimes find myself kind of tugging at it. And, you know, it's kind of a narrow line. Like when you see this sweater flat, like it's just a straight square. So you're not getting any like extra boat. It's just kind of like the opening your neck sits in. So that's one thing I would probably modify if I knit this again. It's just giving myself a little bit more room in the neckline, in the neck hole. Let's see. So the pattern comes in 10 sizes. It ranges from a 36-inch bust to a 72-inch bust, which is 91.5 to 183 centimeters, if I can read my own handwriting. And like I said, it's meant to have 10 inches or 25.5 centimeters of positive ease. I think mine ended up being 42 inches in circumference, which, like I said, is right smack dab in the middle between size 2 and 3, which is perfect for me. I'm very happy with the fit. And yeah, I guess, wow, I kind of flew through that. I guess that's all I have to say. Like I said, one thing I love about this is actually, I'm really happy I used this yarn because this sweater is so drapey. So this yarn, I don't have a tag, but I think this is alpaca and merino, maybe with a little bit of nylon in it too, because I actually think I have a friend who did socks in this yarn. I'll put the blend up here because now I'm really curious. I want to say it's alpaca, merino, and nylon, but it might actually just be alpaca and nylon now that I think of it. I don't quite remember. But regardless, this is an alpaca dominant yarn. So if you are sensitive to alpaca, this probably won't be a good time for you. I will say if it's a bit warm, sometimes it will feel a little bit, not prickly, but slightly itchy in parts. But if it's cool out, it's comfortable and warm, and the drape is fantastic. You can see it has started to pill a little bit in the arms, but it's a very fluffy yarn, and I have worn this sweater a ton. So I should have put the years that I knit these. I didn't, but I knit this several years back. Like, I knit it at least 2 years ago. And in those 2 years, it is one of my go-tos for like some of the cooler, when it's not really cold, but it's kind of cool out, or if we're going somewhere in the winter months where I know it's going to be a little bit warm inside, but cold outside. This has just been my go-to. It's a really great transitional sweater. And I love the fact that the way this yarn knit up, you can't really tell the difference between the stitches. Like I said, if you've seen me, you know, some of the details bother me. And like the body being reverse stockinette and the sleeves just being regular stockinette, I didn't love that. It wasn't my favorite thing because I feel like it would have kind of bothered me. But with this yarn that's got the halo and the fluff, you don't see the stitch definition at all. And you really would have to look to be like, oh wait, that's technically a different type of fabric. And I'm just really thrilled with it. So I recommend this pattern. Obviously, if you've knit an Andrea Mowry pattern, then you know that, I mean, she really holds your hand through the whole thing. She's got every detail you could possibly need. And it's just an all over great pattern. Just one thing I would recommend is when you're going to bind off for your neck, just maybe put some like safety pins or something where you think you're gonna bind off, and then try it on just to see how you feel about the neckline. Because I wanna say even with the other people who got gauge on Ravelry, I believe there were several people who didn't love the way the neckline kind of sits, just because it's a little bit snug. So I would love to maybe open this up a little bit more, but it's beautiful. Like, it's really great. And yeah, so that is my Weekender Light. And we will move on to my next sweater now. Next up on our list, I am wearing the Debonnaire Sweater by Renate Dziedataja. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong, but I believe that's the right pronunciation of her name. This was actually a blind test knit that I did. I saw a call for testers for a new magazine that was coming out. It was a new knitting magazine, and they were just looking for testers and they couldn't show any of the patterns. So I just blindly tested, or blindly applied. And within a couple of weeks, they emailed me back with the pattern and asked if I was still available. And this worked out pretty well. So I was able to knit this 3 summers ago, I think. I think I knit this like three-ish years ago, something like that. And let's see, so it was for Radam magazine, and it was issue number 3. Now, I looked up on Ravelry, and I don't think you can actually buy this pattern on its own. I think you have to buy the magazine. And so it's $25 for a 10 pattern ebook if you are interested in this pattern. So a few details about this sweater. It's actually great that I can talk about this one because sometimes I'll pop it up on my mannequin, and I have had a few people ask me about it, ask me how to wear it. And so I will chat a little bit about that now. I knit this on size 2, and I used the recommended needles, which were US 4 or 3.5 millimeter. That's for the body, and then it was US 2.5 or 3 millimeters for the button band. This is I believe it's a 4x2 rib in the body, and it looks like a wrap cardigan, but it is actually connected here. So it's technically I think it's called like a wrap sweater is what you would call it. And it is knit top down. So this is a little bit different than the field day in that you start back here with the, I don't want to call it a button band, I guess you start with the collar band. And so you do that join, you do the collar band, and then you actually knit from the collar band, and then from there the construction is similar to a field day cardigan, where you use German short rows to build out the back, and then you kind of do both flaps, and then you work those flaps, and then eventually you actually join, you do several increases until you get to the point where both of these are supposed to be, and you do a join here, and then you do the ribbing and bind off, and then you just pick up the sleeves like you would with a drop shoulder. Okay, so more details about this. The recommended yarn for this pattern was Hedgehog Fibers Tweedy DK. It's a Falkland Merino, and I didn't have access to any of that near me. So what I did have access to, and this was all the rage when I bought this, is the, what is this? This is Harrisville's design. Blah. This is Harrisville Designs Daylights, and it's an American Cormo DK. And the colorway I used is Lint. And so if you are not familiar with this yarn, the big deal with this yarn is that they did a Daylights, and then I think the night was called Nightshades. I think that was the name of that. And basically there was a natural line and then a black line. And the natural like Ecru colorway, each of them had different colors that are essentially undertones. So this one was the purple undertone. And so basically if you look at all the little flecks in there, you can see that the little added pieces have a very subtle purple to them. And that gives it kind of this purple undertone. I actually have a decent, this is one of those bits of yarn where I've got like a full skein and then like a half a skein. How much did I use? For this, for size 2, I used 857 yards or 343 grams. And that left me with a skein and like 3/4 of a skein. And it's DK weight, and it's just been sitting in my stash ever since, and I've been trying to figure out what to do with it. But back to this guy. So this, I actually think it's a good yarn for this. The American Cormo, it's nice because it feels rustic. Like it's not soft, but it's also not scratchy, but it gives you that very traditional wool feel where it feels very hardy and very warm. And like it's gonna keep you very warm on a nice cold day, and it's got a really good memory to it, and it's nice and bouncy. So this is not one that I wear a lot. And I will say just for, I think a lot of it has to do with my body type. So I'm smaller up top and I have more of a pear shape. So I've got pretty wide hips. And the fact that this joins here is awkward for me. I think if I was a little bit more straight up and down, it would probably fit more comfortably, but I find that I'm constantly pulling this because of two things. One, it kind of closes at the waist, and two, this I think I need to join this. Now, interestingly, during the test, there was no mention of any sort of closure, but I noticed since then on the project page that they've actually sewn it right there, which is actually a great idea. I've thought about adding maybe like a snap or something, but maybe just sewing it down would be the way to go, just because it does kind of falls. And part of it is probably because I don't have a lot up top to like keep it in place. But I think it definitely, if you were to do something like this, I would definitely recommend just adding something there to give it a little bit more stability. And so I will probably do that. Maybe that means I'll get a little bit more wear, but again, the here always feels a little awkward on me too. Like I said, this was a blind test, so I didn't see this ahead of time. When I'm picking out patterns, I kind of steer away from any tops that narrow in on the waist just for me in particular. But if this is a sort of design that you like, if you kind of like those wrap style cardigans, then this is a great pattern to knit. It was a really fun one to knit. It was one, the construction was really interesting, and it was fun to kind of watch it come together. I sometimes feel like these kind of constructions feel a little bit like magic. Like you just start with a band and then you're like building out a flap here and a flap here, and the next thing you know, it's taken shape and it looks really cool, especially when you're doing these V increases to give it that cross. And doing the closure to connect it together felt really satisfying. Yeah, and then it's just, you know, tubular bind off, really small needle size for the collar band, I don't know, button band, whatever you want to call this as it comes down. So it's a nice difference in appearance from the rest of the body and the ribbing. So the pattern comes in 8 sizes. It ranges from a 34¼ inch bust to a 65¼ inch bust, which is 87 centimeters up to 165 centimeters. And it recommends, the ease range is interesting. So it recommends an ease range from 1 inch up to 9 3/4 inches. And mine, I think I ended up with about 3 inches of positive ease. I mean, it's a little tricky because up here it's a little bit, you know, awkward, but yeah. And yeah, so people have asked me how I wear this, and I will typically wear either a camisole underneath or just like a t-shirt sometimes if it's like really chilly. But again, this one doesn't get a lot of wear from me, and I've actually wondered about maybe just donating this or seeing if there's somebody else with like that can wear the size who wants to take this off my hands, because it's a beautiful knit, which is why I often display it on my mannequin, because I feel like if I can't wear it, I should at least be able to show it off. But this is just one of those that doesn't work for my specific body type. And so that's just always something I try to keep in mind with this. And you can see while I'm talking, I'm just like tugging at it. Like you can just see, I never enjoy wearing a garment where I'm just constantly just like, ugh, like pulling down the neck or pulling up the pieces. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you knit something like this. Now, with that being said, I know that there are a lot of wrap style cardigans that are really popular right now. So I actually feel like there are a lot of people who would be really happy with a garment like this. So if you like the wrap style, but you want more of a sweater, definitely check this out. I mean, you'll have to buy an ebook, but you might end up with a lot of other cool patterns. So it's worth looking at. So this is the Debonnaire Sweater, and we will move on to the next one. Okay, I am back with another Andrea Mowry classic. I am wearing her Woolen Honey sweater, and this pattern is $9 on Ravelry. And you have probably seen me wear this before if you have watched this podcast. I wore this actually like earlier in the summer. We had a chilly morning, and this sweater is honestly one of my go-to transitional weather sweaters. Just whenever, if we're having a chilly morning or really like throughout the fall, this is definitely one of my go-tos. I grab for it a lot. I mean, the color alone just screams fall. So, and this is actually with the yarn I was talking about previously. This uses the Brooklyn Tweed Loft. So I'll just go through the pattern. I knit size 1, and I used the recommended needles, which were US 3 or 3.25 for the ribbing, and US 4 or 3.5 millimeter for the body. This pattern is one of the few where I used recommended everything. Not only did I use the recommended yarn, which was the Brooklyn Tweed Loft, but I even used the same color that she wore in her photos. That's not something I normally do. I normally substitute my yarn quite frequently. I will almost always change the color to something that I think is better suited for me, or just wanting to change it up so it feels a little different. But this was one of those patterns where I saw the photo and I was like, I want that. I want exactly that. I don't want to change anything. I thought the color was perfect. I thought just the way it sat was great. I think the yarn is a fantastic choice. I mean, it's just stunning. If you watched my previous episode, then you know that I just think of this pattern as like a work of art. It's such a clever design with the way that the yoke is shaped and the motif, which uses its elongated stitches to create this slip stitch motif that makes this honeycomb. And then on top of that, It is in garter stitch, so it actually creates that honeycomb effect. I don't know. I just think it's just so clever. It's just such an amazing design. So the color that I used is Embers. And let's see, I used I used like 5 1/4 skeins of yarn, which ended up being 1,443 yards or 262 grams. Now, if you've been paying attention to the weights of these yarns, I think that this is such a great example of what you get with a woolen spun yarn, because even though I used 1,400 yards, this sweater is only 262 grams. That is light. That is really light. It's super light and bouncy. It keeps me warm, but it's not heavy, and I don't feel like I'm gonna sweat a ton. I run warm. I'm always kind of warm. But this sweater is just great. It's really breathable and light. And for that, I think that using something like Loft is a really nice choice. So this is a great yarn. And also, even though I bought this, so I think I knit this in the beginning of the pandemic, and I bought a little bit of extra yarn, and I still have like 3 skeins of this, and I'm trying to figure out what to do with, and eventually it'll come around again and I'll find a use for this, because I really do love this yarn. So let's see, like I said, this is a top-down yoke, and yeah, it's just garter stitch in the round. There's not much else to say about that. I mean, the yoke, obviously you need to pay attention to the chart to make sure that you get this nice honeycomb effect. You can see it's asymmetric, which is really cool, and it carries on the back, which hopefully will show up in B-roll. But yeah, and then just, it has like 3/4 inch sleeves, which I decided to keep, and I'm really glad I did. I think that works really well because this is meant to have quite a bit of ease. Let's see, the recommended ease is between 4 to 9 inches, and I think mine's on the higher end. This pattern comes in 7 sizes, and it ranges from a 39-inch bust to a 63-inch bust, which is 99 to up to 160 centimeters. And so this definitely has more positive ease than I would typically go for. However, I love that about this, and I think that's part of the reason why I love to wear this. It doesn't feel too tight, or I'm not shifting it around ever. Even with, like, I would say it doesn't have a super wide neckband, but I'm never pulling at it, I'm never tugging at it. I just think it fits great, and I really like that the 3/4 inch sleeves, 3/4 length sleeves, I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. I think that the sleeves lend itself to just being really nice for these transitional days. It's just the perfect fall sweater. I just really love this sweater. I love it so much. Like, all of the things came together to make just the perfect garment. So if you have debated this sweater and maybe shied away because the detailing looks difficult, don't shy away from it. It looks harder than it is, as long as you can follow a chart and just, I mean, you're just knitting and purling. These stitches are really not complex. You're just wrapping the yarn around your needle a few extra times and holding on to it, and then eventually knitting into it a couple rows later. Like, it's super simple. So I highly, highly recommend this one. It's a great knit, and it's something to be proud of once you finish, because it's not like your everyday sweater, and that's what's so great about it. So that is the Woolen Honey, and we will move on to my next one. All right, I am back, and I am wearing my Primavera sweater. So this is a sweater by Melanie Reinert. It is $7.50 on Ravelry. And this is a really fun one. This is just kind of, I don't know, this is like my fantasy sweater. This is it almost for some reason feels kind of like ethereal in a way, and I think it's because of the fiber and construction of the garment. The reason I am putting this in the fall category is because it's quite lacy and fluffy. Like, this keeps me pretty warm, but this isn't one of the sweaters you're gonna wanna wear in the deep winter where you're actually looking to bundle. As you can see, it is lace work throughout. And what's fun about this is that is knit solely using Surrey alpaca. So let me do a little bit of details about the pattern. I knit this in size 1 on the recommended needles, which was, let's see, a US 7 or 4.5 millimeters for the ribbing, and then a US 10 or 6 millimeters for the body. And that means that this knit flew. Like, it flew. I knit this so fast. So the pattern actually calls for holding 3 strands of mohair, and I believe the mohair that they recommended was We Are Knitters Touch Me mohair in 3 strands. But if you know me, then you know that I'm not really a mohair person. I definitely need Surrey. I always use Surrey instead of mohair. I just find mohair really itchy for me personally. So I decided to use Fyberspates Cumulus, and I just held 2 strands together because the Surrey is thicker than the mohair, and that oh, it just knit up like such a dream. It is so perfect. And I was a little bit nervous at first about this just because knitting solely with something this fuzzy means that ideally you really don't want to make a mistake, because ripping this out is going to be a nightmare. So I made sure to pay pretty close attention while I was knitting, and honestly this knit up so quickly because it's really easy. Like, it looks, when you look at it, you're like, oh man, that's like an all over cable sweater, but it's not. It's all lace. I didn't use a cable needle for any of it. It's just lace motifs and then knit and purl stitches. And it was really a dream to knit. It's a dream to work with. This is in the colorway Thistle, which this was one of those where I think this particular yarn and color was on sale at my local yarn store. They were having one of their like annual clearance sales, so I just grabbed all of it because while I typically like to lean for more saturated jewel tone colors, I do like purples on me, and I just thought this was a really nice one. And originally when I bought this, I had actually had this in my stash thinking that I would eventually hold it double with something else, but it turned out that I had enough to do this sweater, and I'm really glad I did. Let's see, this pattern is a top-down raglan sweater. Now, one thing I will note, the only thing I modified is that this pattern actually called for a doubled over collar that you would knit down. Personally, I didn't love that on this. I think what I liked about this sweater was how feminine and romantic it felt, and I kind of wanted that drama to continue on the collar, and I thought that doing the bulky collar kind of sported it up a little bit. And so I just decided I didn't knit the collar quite as long as recommended, but I knit it a little bit long so it would give me a little bit of drama on the neck. And I think that turned out really great. And so I did that. And I think that was the only that was the only modification I made. Otherwise, I knitted according to pattern. It's got these great dramatic sleeves. I think it was just a straight sleeve. I don't think there were increases or decreases. And then you just did a rapid decrease right at the cuff. And so it gives it this really nice billowy drama, and it just feels really nice. Like, I feel like when I wear this, I'm wearing a dramatic statement sweater, and it's so soft. The pattern comes in 5 sizes. There wasn't any E's listed, and the sizes, when I looked at the measurements for the sizes listed didn't seem right. So I don't want to list those, but it does come in 5 sizes, and I knit the first size. Now, the one thing I will say about this, I mean, you can probably tell I have worn this quite a bit. It's a very cozy sweater, but it's also, I feel like you can dress it up nicely, and that's really fun about this. The one thing I will say about knitting with 2 strands of Surrey alpaca, which this has a silk core, and then it's wrapped with Surrey. So a similar construction to like a mohair. But the one thing I will say is that over time and washing, it does feel like it's kind of matted down a little bit and doesn't look I don't know if you can really, it doesn't look quite as crisp as, you know, like right after I knit it. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, part of that, especially like looking back at it on camera, you can still clearly see the motif. But it's definitely softened, let's say. It has softened over time. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Again, I don't necessarily think that's a downside, but just keep that in mind when you're knitting it, that as crisp as it looks when you're knitting it, after a few washes, it's not going to look quite that crisp. And if you're okay with that, I say do it, because this is actually a sweater I've gotten a lot of compliments on. I really enjoy wearing it. It's really cozy. I love the drama. I just love how dramatic this is. This was a really nice knit, and it knit up really quickly. So just a nice one to have where it looks like quite a complex pattern, but it's very simple. It's a very short stitch repeat, and it's pretty easy to memorize, and just lace work that knits up beautifully. Now, it is all over lace, so you will definitely want to wear something under it. I mean, I guess you don't have to, but you know, your mileage may vary. All right, so that's the Primavera sweater. Okay, I am back with one last item, and I'm calling this a bonus item actually, because this isn't technically part of my fall knits list, because I feel like those were all like proper sweaters, cardigans, things that work well in these cooler months. But I wanted to also talk about this as my one item that's great for like transitional. I think the one thing that's important to note about fall is it's a transitional month. And so some days are going to be warm and some days are going to be cold, and then some days are going to be right in between. And if you're anything like me, having those in between items are really important to layer. Like, I just love to layer in the fall. And so I wanted to bring back out my moonset tee, which if you have watched my other videos, you'll know I also talked about this in my summer knits video. But I think this is one of those patterns that's great to talk about, because depending on the yarn you use, I think this is a really good transitional pattern. So this is the moonset tee by Ozetta. It's $6.50 on Ravelry, and it is a top-down V-neck drop shoulder tee. And it's actually a very similar construction to the Field Day cardigan, interestingly enough. The only differences obviously are that you are doing just a full top and you have a V-neck instead of, you know, a cardigan. The modifications that I made to this. So first off, I knit the size 2 on the recommended needles, which was a US 1.5, which is a 2.5 millimeter. And I did that for the ribbing, which actually I think that might have been smaller than the recommended. I went down because I was doing ribbing elsewhere. And then US 3, which is a 3.25 millimeter, and that's for the body, and that is the recommended needle size. The biggest change that I made that kind of affected how this garment works for different seasons is the yarn that I used. So I already had this in stash when I decided to make this. I used lace Seta Mulberry by Lana Grossa. So it's a fingering weight yarn, and the difference here is that the pattern recommends using Knitting for Olive Pure Silk, which is fully a summer yarn. I got exactly the right gauge, like my gauge was perfect. It was a perfect match for this. Oh, Boink is coming to say hi. The yarn was a perfect match in terms of gauge, like just absolutely perfect. But the difference here is that this is a silk, alpaca, and merino blend. And the little bit of alpaca in here really makes a difference with seasons and how it's going to feel when you're wearing it. So if you wear silk, it's a cooling fabric. It's going to feel great in the summer. It's going to be breathable. It's going to be very drapey. You'll get the same drape and effect from the silk and the alpaca, which is why I decided to go with this. But the alpaca is going to make this significantly warmer. And I noticed that when I wore this on my first day of our flock trip this summer, when we went out to Bainbridge Island, and it ended up being quite a warm day. I wore this and I was very hot. I was very, very hot in this. And like if it's breezy, it's great. But if it's kind of stuffy and warm, I found that this isn't exactly what I want to be wearing. And that is totally due to my yarn choice. But I think that's a really fun and interesting point, because now that it's cooling off, I am actually grabbing for this quite a bit. I'm excited to be able to wear this because it's the perfect transitional knit, you know? It's not in a super hot fiber, but at the same time, it's in a warm enough fiber to where I can wear a t-shirt and feel really comfortable just throwing my raincoat over top of it and going out and being great. You know, sometimes I have like a light trench coat with a hood that's like my raincoat, and it's not very warm on purpose because during these transitional months, I like to layer, and really that outer shell is just to keep me dry, and I'll focus my warmth on the inner layers. And so I feel really comfortable wearing this, putting that trench coat on, going outside, and I'm gonna be the perfect temperature. And so I think some of these tees really work well for these transitional seasons. And so I think especially if you run kind of warm and you don't feel great about wearing a summer, or not a summer, if you don't feel great wearing like a sweater in the fall months where you are, I think something like this is a really great option. Like it still has a very classic shape, so it feels kind of fall. Like I don't feel like I'm wearing a summer garment in the wrong month. Like this feels like just a really nice garment that you can wear in multiple seasons. And it still looks very polished. So this is, let's see, I used almost 5 balls of yarn. So I used 907 yards, which is 237 grams. And if I didn't mention, this is in the colorway Ecru. Unfortunately, I think that this yarn line is discontinued. So I don't know if they just replaced it with something similar or if this yarn is totally done, but I really enjoyed working with it. It's incredibly soft. You can feel the silk in it. The alpaca is nice because it does keep me warm without overheating me too much in these transitional months. Like actually right now while I'm sitting here, I am incredibly comfortable. Like I might actually just keep this on for the rest of the day. That's how perfect I feel like this is right now. The pattern comes in 9 sizes. So it ranges from a 32-inch bust up to a 59-inch bust, which is 81 to 150 centimeters. It recommends 4 inches of positive ease. And yeah, it's a great tee. And I mean, honestly, if you really liked the silhouette of this, but you decided you wanted sleeves, you could just knit a full sleeve and you could get a proper sweater out of this and still have the same silhouette and neckline. So I love patterns like this. It's something that you can kind of modify. I am all about modifying to your preferences because why not? I mean, that's the beauty of making it yourself instead of going to a store and buying it, is that you can modify it to your choosing. And I think Boink agrees. So that kind of concludes my list of fall knits actually. Like I said, this is really a bonus one in case you looked at all of the other things I was wearing and you were like, girl, it's too hot to wear any of that right now. Maybe consider a tee like this. If you stuck around, thank you so much for watching. I will be back to a normal episode next week. And if you had any questions or comments about anything that I was wearing, definitely feel free to leave a comment below. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have if there's anything I missed out on, but I will put all the details to all of the patterns and all of the yarns in my show notes below, so definitely take a look at that. And if you would like to get in touch with me, you can find me at meeshyfrazz on Instagram and Ravelry. I am meeshyfrazz@gmail.com, and then you can also find me at my blog, which is meeshyfrazzknits.com. So thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.